to my fellow content creators, always make sure that you get enough sleep. Why? Because when you don't get enough sleep, that will cause you stress. And if you don't know that the lack of sleep is causing you stress, you could start thinking that stress is coming from your thinking process. But your thinking process is not creating the stress, it's coming from the stress that is being caused from your lack of sleep. Yesterday I put out a lackluster video, but I wanted to get one out, but it's because I lacked sleep. And by the time I went to do that video, I was a bit stressed out. Well, why was I stressed out? Because I didn't have enough sleep. If you're going to want to have, your best mind, right, and the most energy towards being able to put that towards making your content, making your videos, making your gaming books, doing whatever, get enough sleep. It's so undervalued, and I see a lot of people admitting that they're not getting enough sleep, and then saying they're stressed, and I'm like, well, yeah, because you're not getting enough sleep. 6 to 8 hours, it should be every night. Never break that process. If you can get in the process of getting yourself at least 6 hours every single night, do it. And it will change your life, especially if you're up quite often and you're stressed out quite often. I guarantee a lot of that, the stress that you're experiencing, a lot of it will go away if you can get yourself into a routine of getting some actual sleep. What is the difference between an actual war game and a tabletop role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons when it comes to using miniatures? The war game depends on the look of the miniatures to help with the imagination and to overall make the entire experience more entertaining. Now, when you get over to a tabletop role-playing game, what is the difference? What are you doing there? Well, the game really is just taking part inside of the mind. So you don't need to spice that up, juice that up. Like, that's not the aim of the war game. The war game is on a board. So they're trying to spike the imagination because that's really not where they're going. That's not how the game is ran. But when you get to a tabletop role-playing game that spends the time inside of the mind, you really don't need the miniatures to take care of that. Actually, they're just there to help you and the players know where things are, know where you are in combat, be helpful in that way. So you don't need the painted figurines. You don't need this over-opposing look compared to what you're trying to imagine. You don't need the piece to tell you what the guy looks like. Your imagination, without all that, can take care of it. And you're playing a game like D&D, a tabletop role-playing game, where you're focused on taking care of that. The difference between that and the war game is focused on the board. So they're only trying to spike your imagination for the entertaining part of the entire thing. I prefer pure theater of the mind, because I can do that. But I'm not against somebody using pieces in a grid, to help them play the game. Not at all. And maybe they enjoy it that way. That's all good with me. But when you start using the miniatures in the grid to either inspire or replace the imagination, well, you're doing something that's unnecessary. The imagination doesn't need the inspiration. It's the imagination itself is what will inspire the entertainment, inspire the fun, and make a better experience for the player. Now, they could start off with what you're showing them as a piece and try to imagine their character looks like that, or they can freely try to imagine what they want their character to look like without any hints, without any help. And are you really helping? When you find out that you can fire your imagination to an extreme without any triggers, without looking at anything, you realize, well, you could use that to fire up your imagination, but the figurine isn't necessary. It doesn't help, right? It's just a tool. It's not better. It's just something different. It's a different path, into a part of your imagination, which I think is still better. It serves you better when you're just trying to make it up purely in your mind through description. If you don't believe me, if you really believe you need the miniature, with the fancy look and the grid to really fire up your imagination, well, do me a favor. Next time you go to play, replace the miniatures with quarters and nickels and dimes, and replace your grid with a sheet of paper with all the blocks, marked out so you know where things are, but a simple blank white sheet of paper with whatever you want to add to it. Graph paper, I don't care. Just something you make yourself, pretty simple. Use the quarters, use the dimes, use the nickels to represent different people, stuff like this. And just try to play an entire game the way you would with your normal miniatures with just that. And want to know what you're going to find out? That you're fine. That your imagination fires up just like any other time with or without the fancy miniatures. So if the point to the pieces in the grid is to help you track, say, combat, well then what is your excuse for not just using quarters and dimes and a piece of paper? Right? What's your excuse for needing to buy these fancy looking toys in your older years? If it's unnecessary to use the toy and you can use the quarter, right? Because you're only trying to achieve remembering things, knowing where people are and what's going on in combat, why would you waste your money? And do you know all the purchasing to miniatures and stuff like this? It props up companies like WotC. When they're losing money for putting out bad products, you would think maybe they'll change. Well, they're not going to change if you're providing them with income through miniatures. And especially when the majority of people providing the income are grown adults with jobs, spending crap loads of money on these toys, these kids' toys. Look, if you're dead serious, you're a grown man who really thinks you need miniatures in a grid, use the dimes, nickels, and quarters in a white sheet of paper and do it yourself. And save crap loads of money. And stop coming up with excuses to buy kids' toys so what, you can paint them? Now look, if you do YouTube and you're a painter and you make your money that way, I'm not saying don't make your money. I'm saying to people that aren't really making anything off of the miniature gimmick, right? Their painting is going nowhere. And when they play the games, they have all these, they have $500 or $1,000 or maybe a few $1,000s worth of unnecessary things. Because in reality, you can achieve the same thing in a tabletop role-playing game with quarters and a piece of paper. If you want the miniatures to help you with your imagination and for those to be meaningful, go play Battletech. Go play a war game where that does help with the imagination because it's not a mind game in the same way. So you're using other tools to get that going. In a D&D game, you don't need the figurine and the terrain to get the imagination going. That's where we play the game. So it's always on the go, right? It's just not the same when you get to a war game. So I can understand why things like that, like the way the miniatures look, is a benefit to the experience overall. Maybe you are someone in the tabletop role-playing game hobby that defends miniatures. Like, you defend these figurines. Well, I'm with you as far as, needing the quarters and the grid. But I would say some of you have become delusional in your defense of miniatures. Once you realize you don't need them the way you might argue that you need them to spike up they help with the imagination. No, they really don't. In a way, it helps direct your imagination purely from what you would have come up with, which I think what you would have come up with through listening to the description is better than what the miniature would represent to you. The miniature is going to limit you to trying to match up with something. Where if you're free to imagine what you want, you're always going to imagine what is most entertaining to you, what is most cool to you, what is most interesting to you. And that figurine is just a figure that came from someone else's imagination. And now you're going to try to, limit yours to match what you're saying? You think it's helping. And maybe if you weren't thinking of something right away, you feel like it's triggering your imagination. Well, the figurine is there to do that in a war game, but you shouldn't need that in a tabletop role-playing game where the entire time is spent in where? The imagination. That's it. It's good to run your imagination during a war game, but you're trying to do technical things, right? So it's not necessary to always be in your imagination. It's good to be looking at the board and really focusing on the mechanics in the game. It's just not the same thing with a tabletop role-playing game. So when you're using things to help you, which could be dimes, nickels, quarters, and a white piece of paper, that should be good enough. Because what's the excuse I always hear from people that promote minis? Well, we use them to help us keep track of the fight so it doesn't get confusing for the players. Well, then if that's the case, you only need the dimes, the nickels, the quarters, the piece of paper, and you can help your players keep track of everything. You don't need the overpriced minis and your fucking grid. You don't need to waste all that time on the game, and you don't need to invest all that money. Save that for the books, right? If not, just save your money overall. The hobby doesn't need to be that expensive. And I'm not spending my time in this video trying to pitch you Theater of the Mind. I'm not trying to say that using these things is no good to your gameplay. I just don't see the point in using toys. Especially if you're in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. These are kids' toys. These are expensive kids' toys, right? You don't need to be purchasing that, and you're an adult. You know better. You should know how this works. You should know that it's unnecessary to spend your money that way. And if you're not making a YouTube channel and making money off painting children's toys, you should really consider doing something else that's not working out for you. And why would you want to keep using kids' toys to play a D&D game? Use the white sheet of paper, the graph paper. Use the quarters, right? Use something that's cheaper that maybe has the name. It could be, you can cut out cardboard circles instead and just write names, goblin, whatever down. And you might think, well, oh, they look really cool if you get the figurine. No, trust me. Trust your imagination like you would when you read a book. Trust your imagination. When you read the book, you don't need miniatures there to help you, like the miniature of one of the characters in the story, to help you imagine what you're seeing, like what's being told to you, what's being described. Trust your imagination when you get to a tabletop role-playing game. You don't need to waste your money. I'm serious. The toys are unnecessary. And they are kids' toys. Let's be serious about this. These are toys made for children. Right? So if you're in your 40s and you're not making money off painting and you're buying these toys and you're spending a lot of money doing so, well, I hate to say it. I don't hate to say it. I'm going to tell you the truth. You are a fool. Anyway, for now, take care. You know what you can do? You can hit the like button. You can share the video. Oh, and there's another button you can press. That one that lets you subscribe to my channel for more content. Oh yeah, there's that bell thing. You can press that so you know when I've uploaded a new video right away.